Chairman Kaufmann, thanks for joining us here in our studio. I wanted to begin with kind of a basic question. What, in your view, is the current state of the Republican Party here in Iowa?
I mean, it's as strong as it's ever been. I took over 10 years ago, and the party was an absolute mess. Owed a lot of bills, and Iowa was very, very deep purple. And 10 years later, we're very red. I think most people understand that Donald Trump's going to win the state. We've got all 6 of our federal officials are Republican. I don't think anybody seriously thinks that we're going to lose control of the legislature. It's strong, but from that position of strength, it also allows us to try to expand still. So we're not resting on our laurels.
Yeah, you mentioned from the state standpoint, you've had total control in the State House and the governor's office now for 7+ years. What do you think is the party's signature achievement in that time?
Definitely tax relief. There's been several income tax bills that we're now going to accelerate the 3.8% flat tax. That's going to save Iowans billions. Last year they worked on property tax relief. I think they're going to do more along those lines. So definitely tax relief, and then education funding. Last year we brought Iowa from toward the bottom of the list of states to almost to the top in terms of starting pay for teachers. That was a Republican idea. Every Democrat voted no on that, and we're also looking at making sure that parents have choice. So we're funding our public schools. We are going to be at the leader of the pack in terms of the starting pay for public school educators, but at the same time we have a very, very robust choice system. So I think those two, parental choice, I would throw that in there as well, giving parents more choice in terms of their students, whether the students decide to become vaccinated, whether the students decide where they're going to go to school, the types of materials that they're going to see at that school, et cetera.
You brought up education. Obviously, nothing takes up more of the state budget than that. And for years now, I mean, as Republicans have touted, on paper this is true, funding has reached record levels, has continued to reach record levels, but it has not kept up with inflation. Isn't that effectively a cut for schools that are now struggling to make ends meet without, as we've seen in a lot of districts in the last few months, significant cuts to their budget and their staff?
Well, and I think schools have to look at themselves. I mean, when we first started the growth of administration at these schools has also skyrocketed. You now have assistants to the assistants in the central office. So I mean, the schools also have to tighten their belts when it comes to inflationary pressures. Look, if Republicans had control of the country as we do in the state, we wouldn't have these inflationary issues. We didn't have them during the Trump presidency, and we just reached another 2-year high in terms of inflation at this particular point. 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So yes, we can give more resources. We cannot break the bank to give those resources. And so ultimately, I think we are funding education at a level that's sustainable. When I was in the legislature, there's been one cut to education since my time in Iowa politics in 20 years. It's when there was a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor under Chet Culver. I was during those years. And every single superintendent in my district says, please tell us what you can give, not make a false promise and then pull it back again.
You know, there has been a shift in politics, kind of the my way or the highway mentality, it seems to me, both here in Iowa and across the country. Governor Reynolds actually primaried several Republicans that blocked her original efforts on the public funding for private schools. And she famously said of then candidate Brenna Bird, I want my own attorney general. Is that a good idea for governance? Because as I assume you do want full control of the State House here and forever, that may not always be the case, and you will have to work with the other side. But it seems like we're kind of stuck in this perpetual, well, if I don't get everything I want, then I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to take anything.
Over 90% of the bills that passed the Iowa legislature last year were bipartisan.
But the signature ones I'm talking about, you know, you mentioned taxes, the heartbeat bill, those are not. And some of them are actually unpopular in every metric of polling. But, you know, I think we could all agree on, at the end of the day, people vote with their pocketbooks. So I guess, how do we get over this cycle? Because it seems like the rhetoric just gets hotter and hotter. The things I hear from both the governor and from leaders at the State House is nothing compared to what I heard from them 10 years ago.
Sure, and I think you can say the same thing about the minority party and Democrats. I mean, I personally have received 2 death threats that have been investigated by the FBI as the chair of the Republican Party. So I understand that polarization. Look, elections have consequences. We may very well, as a country and as a state, rely on party too much. The party system is what we have right now. And when you have a majority, when you have a trifecta on some of these big issues, we're going to follow through on campaign promises. That's the key. To me, it isn't necessarily what is done as much as have you told the voters what you're going to do before the election. That's the reason why I believe we continue to win elections. It's the reason why we're going to keep the majority. We may even expand these majorities. And you are exactly right. People do vote by their pocketbooks. And right now, the confidence, the real spending power is less than 1%. It was 16% increase during Trump's time period. That, to me, that and immigration, the economy and immigration, are the two issues that are going to overwhelmingly dominate at the federal, I would say at the local and the state levels, and I think the GOP wins every single time with those.
You know, you've been in this job now for just about 10 years, and obviously this has been a pretty dramatic, one of the most dominant takeovers for one party in the state of Iowa in its history. How long do you plan on continuing in this job?
It's, I mean, it wears on you after a while. There's been 6 Democratic chairs during my particular tenure. I wished I could take full credit for that. Maybe I should, since I'm on television. But honestly, this is about the mood of the state. When the Mississippi River and Dubuque and Fort Madison and Keokuk, when Southern Iowa, when the Missouri River towns all flipped and went red, I can't take credit for that. It's the policies that we can take credit for. But I can tell you, I've had one partner throughout all of this, and it's been Joe Biden and the Democratic Party here in Iowa that have not learned the age-old adage, all politics is local. You cannot force fit California, New York politics into the Hawkeye state. I think the one thing, if I can say one thing that I've done in the last 10 years, we've operated as one team, and we have picked the local politics that we want to follow, not necessarily what's being handed down. You can see that with the Democrats irresponsibly losing their caucuses. What have we done? We led the way in the caucuses. How did we do that? That wasn't magical. I mean, obviously, Trump liked Iowa more than Biden did, but besides all of that, we stood up and said we are going to go first. The Democrats cowered and said, essentially, have your way with our state. Ultimately, you cannot do that. So all politics is local. That's the secret to the Iowa GOP success.
You mentioned the former president. Obviously, there's a lot of talk right now since the conviction. I'm sure you disagree with the decision, but do you think that these attacks on the judge, the jury, and others involved in this case are warranted? Because there seems to be a lot of misinformation floating out around there, and some of it coming from the former president himself with regards to what he could and could not do and what was actually happening in this case.
I think, Alan Dershowitz, who I don't believe did vote for Trump and will not vote for Trump again, Harvard professor, classic liberal, basically has said this has been a sham. Here's what I would say about the jury. I'm not saying that individual person. I'm not criticizing that individual person. I'm criticizing shopping for a venue where the jury pool comes from an 80 to 85% anti-Trump pool. How in the world can you ever get a fair trial when you are pulling from the Manhattan jury pool? All I'm saying is, why not look at changes of venue? Why not make sure, double sure, triple down that the president is going to get a fair venue? Two of the 4 prosecutors that are going after him made it their campaign rhetoric to go after Donald Trump. The one judge actually gave to Joe Biden.
He gave $15 to Joe Biden.
And his daughter is making a great deal of money from this particular judge. Why can't we, though? Perception is everything. Why couldn't they just double down or triple down on making sure he was getting a fair trial? That's my point. And do I believe that the DOJ is being weaponized? Absolutely, I do. And I hope if Republicans are in charge, I hope if Republicans have the trifecta, I hope you have me back on here, and I hope you call me out and make me defend if the Republicans are doing what the Democrats are doing right now.
Well, you mentioned the Department of Justice. Again, they had nothing to do with this case. They do have 2 other cases that indictments have been filed against the former president. They also just convicted President Biden's son. There's a trial going on right now with Senator Bob Menendez that obviously doesn't look good for him right now. There's another case where a Democratic congressman, Cuellar, has been indicted. How is this weaponization? Because it seems like there are many Democratic leaders that are also facing some serious charges right now.
That's serious charges, but slam dunk cases. Again, I'll go back to Alan Dershowitz, Harvard professor and a liberal. If you look at Hunter Biden's case and the evidence piled up against Hunter Biden's case, which, by the way, ended up in 3 charges, and we all know he's going to get community service. So in that particular case, in that particular situation, comparing that to Trump getting 34 from 34 convictions from a jury pool that's 85% anti-Trump in the last election, with a judge whose daughter is making money, I think it's apples and oranges. I think you can't take jaywalking. You can't take jaywalking versus vehicular manslaughter and compare those two as equal justice.
Well, see, this gets back to a point that I think frustrates me following this for longer than I care to remember, is that it seems like everybody's personal lives are being picked apart as a reason to question their judgment. Does politics really have to come into play with every facet of our lives? Because it seems like it's becoming that way.
I do think it's becoming more, and I'm worried about the politicalization of judges. Look, we all know on the Supreme Court, we can all predict how the Supreme Court is usually going to vote. And we've been able to do that for 20 years. Liberal, conservative, they may not have their partisan labels, but we have an idea of that. So, and they are political appointees. So we are always going to have some of that. That's the reason why I would double down on what I've already said. When you have a high profile person, and heck, if Delaware wouldn't have been friendly to Hunter Biden, if we would have been having that in rural Utah, you would have heard me saying the same thing, that why not change a venue to ensure that politics, or to be more sure that politics is going to play less than a role. I think one thing the justice system can do is react to the inevitable fact that politics is going to play into that. Should personal lives get into every single solitary thing? No, I'm a guy that's received death threats for being a Republican. No, I do not think that it should. But you also cannot stand back and have an onslaught that we have seen against Donald Trump and not react to that. Look, the Republicans have made things personal, but I don't think you will find any time in history, I think you have to go back to almost pre-Civil War, to find a time in a situation where one human being has been demonized to the point where I really believe there is something to the actual Trump derangement syndrome. I actually think, I didn't see anything even close, and I don't think anybody can argue that we did, against Obama from Republicans or against Jimmy Carter from Republicans. Was it hard-hitting? Did we question? You better believe it. Was it this personal vitriol and viciousness? I don't think so.
To be fair, many Republicans questioned Obama's citizenship. They questioned whether or not he was even born in this country. I mean, that to me is kind of personal.
Well, there was a fragment of people that did that, but
including the former president.
Absolutely, but I'm talking about Jeff Kaufmann. I'm talking about the Iowa Republican Party, and I'm telling you, there has been nothing in Iowa even close to what they've done. And the most important thing, though, the most important thing of all, the most important thing I can say here today, is we are on the verge of losing our first in the nation status because of bad decisions by the Democratic Party. I went alone in 30-degree below weather last time. I have the Democratic chair actually saying that she doesn't want to look forward yet. We want to concentrate on this. The caucuses are all about looking forward. Every single Iowan, liberal in Iowa City to a Republican and a conservative in Sioux County, needs to put pressure on this Democratic Party and demand that we put ourselves back into First Nation. Once we lose this thing, we're going to lose everything. And then we can't have the debate on a national level. We're flyover. Right now, it's neat. The Democratic chair used to be able to whisper in Democratic candidates' ears. I could whisper in Republican ears, and Iowa had an outsized force. Bad decisions on the Democratic Party in this state is going to kill one of our most sacred and important and financially lucrative situations that we have in Iowa history. That is important.
I'm born and raised Iowan. I love the Iowa caucuses, but to play devil's advocate here, as deep a red of a state as it is, why would Democrats think that this state would help guide them to a nominee on top of the fact that frankly, you know, Iowa is not the most diverse state, and they're looking for somebody that has more broader appeal.
Well, first of all, I hear that from national reporters all the time. In terms of diversity, my goodness, the winner of the 2016 caucus was Ted Cruz. Number 3 was Marco Rubio. This state made Barack Obama. And we're not just looking at Iowa as first in the nation, we're looking at our carve-out system. If you put Nevada, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Iowa all together, and by the way, South Carolina is very red too, and I don't see the Democrats running from that like our Iowa Democratic Party has run and did exactly as they were told.
But that's because they have a large minority base there.
But the carve-out system is a diverse system. We have proven, Iowans have proven again and again that we vote by the content of a person's character. We made Barack Obama. Ted Cruz won. This is absolutely smoke and mirrors. And to think that the Iowa Democratic Party is in cahoots with the national party to kill our first in the nation status is reprehensible of the exterior. I can't think of a political issue, not one in Iowa history, that will do more harm to this state than what the Iowa Democratic Party is doing right now by foregoing our caucus system and our first in the nation. And everybody, our local media, our local citizens, all of us are going to suffer. We're going to be flyover country. All because you're not doing very well in the last 2 elections? My goodness, this isn't about us. This is about future generations. This is making sure that the Midwest has a voice. New Hampshire speaks for the Northeast. Nevada speaks for the West. South Carolina speaks for the South. We need a Midwestern voice. We do our jobs. Ask Barack Obama. Ask Ted Cruz. Ask anybody that's been here. Ask the group of Republicans, even though Donald Trump won. Ask them if they all got a fair shake here. The Iowa Democratic Party will make the single biggest error and the single biggest trouble and weakness for this state's political environment in our history if they don't get their act together and stand up. It's reprehensible.
This is a question that has been asked a lot among a lot of Republicans. Will you accept the outcome of the 2024 election, regardless of the outcome?
We accept it. The Iowa Republican Party has accepted the outcome of every election. Once the votes are certified, we accept that the election. Right now, I'm talking to people about making sure we accept the results of the election and primaries. You know, because see, each party, look, it sometimes takes a little time for us to, to lick the wounds. And I don't mean that in a flippant way, but you lose, you pour your heart and soul into it. I get that. Yeah. I understand that. But yes, of course. Yes, of course. In Iowa, we have a great voting system. In Iowa, we are secure. Why? Because Republicans have had the trifecta. We have been barraged by saying that we're suppressing voters because we ask for an ID, even though the majority of Democrats back it up. In Iowa, the noise of Democrats trying not to make it more transparent, we just ignored. What is the result of that? I'll tell you one thing. In Pennsylvania, in Georgia, although Georgia's gotten better, Michigan, Arizona, if they had the system that we have here in Iowa, I don't think you would have heard more than a peep in the 2020 election.
You're not denying the results of the 2020 election, though, are you?
I've never done that, okay. Never said that.
I just want to be clear. Because part of the problem in some of those states, I know in Pennsylvania, is they enacted some odd rules in the Republican legislatures in some cases that said you cannot count the absentee vote until the election day vote is counted, and that's what dragged it on for days. Whereas Iowa, we do have a system of you allow the election officials to begin counting that vote before the polls close, so you're going to get a result that night. Shouldn't that be something that every state adopts?
As long as there are observers that can see the counting. That didn't happen in Pennsylvania. Look, just because I'm saying that I accept the results of the election does not mean that I do not believe that there should be constant work on the transparency and the integrity of those elections. Iowa had a good election system 10 years ago. We've got even better. Pennsylvania and other states that have had problems, and there's no doubt they've had problems. The question is, did those problems ever rise to the level where it erased the gap in very close elections? Those states absolutely refuse. And you know what happens every single solitary time in Pennsylvania and Michigan? If it's a Republican legislature, the Democratic governor stops it. If it's a Democratic legislature, it never gets off the ground. Democrats have made election integrity an issue. The silliness of Iowa Democrats somehow trying to make the case that a voter ID supported by a majority in their party is somehow suppressing the vote is not only ludicrous, it's disingenuous.
One other thing I've heard from the former president on the campaign trail, and actually he's utilized some of them, is vowing to pardon those now serving prison time for their actions on January 6th. Do they deserve to be pardoned?
I don't know the individual cases, but I will say this about, and I actually talk about this in my government class, which I am meticulously neutral and unbiased. I don't know how many University of Iowa political science professors can say that, but I am. But what I always tell my students is, when you get to the last week or so of every president's term, I don't care if it's Obama, I don't care if it's George Bush, I don't care if it's Biden, and I don't care if it's Donald Trump, there's always going to be pardons. I wished it wouldn't happen.
But this is day one, though. We're talking day one, not day 4+ years.
Yeah, it's the results of the election. I do not know what the intricacies of what actually happened to those. Do the jail terms match the crime? I mean, clearly Democrats and Republicans got together to pardon and commute sentences for a lot of the drug crimes, especially those involving cannabis, for example. I mean, is there a situation like that? I don't know. Elections have consequences. Look, if Donald Trump is president versus Joe Biden, aside from, I believe, the economic policies, the immigration policies are going to be better, and I think the majority of independents at this point in the polling show that. In Iowa, they certainly do. But there's also going to be consequences in terms of who is appointed on the Supreme Court. Stark differences. There's going to be differences in terms of the use of that pardon power. I mean, that comes with the territory. And we're down to two choices. I mean, anybody that thinks Robert Kennedy has a prayer, stop. Anybody that thinks these third parties have a prayer, they don't. We have, I mean, look, there's a lot of people not particularly excited about the two choices we have. But we have two choices. Every American, if they want their vote to actually matter and not be a protest vote, if they actually want that, they're going to have to go through. And what I would say is, if they don't like the personalities of both of these individuals, then I think what you need to do is strip the personalities away and look at policies and see. And there's going to be some policies you like, some policies you don't like.
Well, it's already been an unprecedented campaign year, and I don't think it's going to change from that.
I think you're right about that.
Chairman Kaufmann, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot.